So thank you, Claudia and Alina, for being here and organizing this session as well. I'm going to share again my screen. So let's see. Here we go. So first of all, we'll tell you that Claudia is here. She's the co-chair of the US chapter. Alina has been involved with the chapter for a long time now, and both of them were really interested in bringing the SDG number 5 into the chapter's work, and that's why we thought about this session. We are not truly experts on this topic, but rather we wanted to start a conversation that can then nourish all the actions that we're taking as the US chapter. So what we'll be doing today, we'll be talking about DEI, intersectionality, and the SDGs. We'll share the US chapter vision, and we want to co-create this vision with you as well. So your voice is important for us. And then we will have a little challenge for you that's recognizing our own social identities. That's really what's lying underneath DEI. Afterwards, Alina will be introducing bias, and we'll start thinking together about how we can become game changers. So to start off, what does DEI mean? Because I'm sure a lot of you have heard DEI, but maybe we're not quite aware of what it stands for. So it's diversity, that is the presence of differences within a given setting. It's equity, that relates to ensuring that processes are impartial, fair, and provide equal possible outcomes for every individual. And inclusion, that is the practice of ensuring that people feel a sense of belonging in the workplace or in their communities. Of course, if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, feel free to use the chat or to raise your hand. So for this session, we thought we wanted to try an ecological approach because DEI impacts our life in multiple ways. We have the ecosystem level that's focused on understanding how DEI is reflected in our society as a whole and why it's important. It's related to inclusion, it's related to acknowledging diversity. Then it also affects at the level of companies and organizations. And here we focus on understanding the important role that organizations play in advancing this topic. In fact, I'm pretty sure you must have seen a lot of companies promoting DEI policies, a lot of other organizations that are really advocating for DEI. And the third level is as individuals, because here we also need to focus on each individual as a change maker. And even though challenges are huge, our individual action is extremely important. We want to inspire you to commit to DEI principles and become DEI champions in your communities. So what we were thinking is, like, usually this is such a big topic and we might feel frustrated because it's so big and there's so much to do. But we're going to try to narrow it down and then go to that individual level and see, okay, what is it that Maria, Claudia, Alina, Ana Paula, Susana can bring into it, and how can we start changing the realities? Because we're pretty sure that this topic repercutes in a lot of the other SDGs as well, because it's talking about how we feel identified and if we feel recognized by our partners, if we feel recognized by our communities, and it has to do with our own individual identities. So now I'd like to invite Claudia to talk about the US chapter vision, because this session has a lot to do with the chapter itself. It's not that we wanted to bring the DEI topic just because, but it's something that has been at the heart of the US chapter, and it's something that we want to commit to and we want to keep on working with. So Claudia, Welcome.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you, Maria, for introducing this session, and thank everyone who showed up to understand a little bit more about our vision and how we can together humanize the DEI vision. So let's start a little bit about the chapter. About a year and a half ago, we decided to start co-create. Let's talk Catalyst style. Let's start to co-create the USA chapter. When we had one of our volunteers offered to us an ideation session where a few areas were revealed as most important for this chapter. One of the top ones, I would say the top one, was actually implementing a DEI structure for Catalyst, starting within the USA chapter, right? So within that, we have scheduled certain meetings that our chapter together formed a particular group session that were charged and they were literally working on gathering people, surrounding the best people who could join the chapter and talk about and grow our DEI understanding. So that was the beginning. Eventually, on the last Catalyze Change Week, what we did, with Alina's support, we presented a DEI template where companies could implement at least on the beginning, they would find ways to guide them in a very brief but very deep template where they can use and start working internally on the main aspects of the DEI. Well, one of our goals was also to embark on a more deeper research on a task force. And then we eventually started that. But what happened? We understood that it was missing the key content, which is the people that will really want to build this. So within this Catalyzing Change Week year, and we decided, okay, this year we're gonna humanize the DEI aspect. We're gonna bring the people together, the ones who are really willing to make this a change for the chapter and also for the whole Catalyst. And that's the vision that our chapter has implemented for within our members, and the vision that we would like you to participate on. So we are not the experts. Our understanding is through the empathy, is through that we have the responsibility to bring this topic on a more deeper level because it has been revealed at one of the most important ones. And within that, I really appreciate your presence here. As you know, we co-create the chapter. There's not like one mandate. It's us together in a bold spirit of co-creation. So feel free to jump in, raise your hand, your voice, and use this session as a collaborative space for a conversation. Thank you, Maria. And yes, you can go forward.
Thank you, Claudia. So I really loved about what you say, that it's a co-creation session and it's really participatory. So feel free to jump in at any time. And the topic we chose today is humanizing DEI, because sometimes it's presented as something that's so far away from us and we look at something like so mechanic. So we wanted to start digging a little bit more into what's behind DEI and how can we create a better understanding of why DEI matters for us. So a cool concept to start thinking about DEI is intersectionality. Intersectionality is a framework for understanding how social identities such as gender, race, ethnicity, social class, religion, sexual orientation, ability, gender identity, age as well, overlap with one another and with systems of power that oppress and create advantages for people in the workplace and in the broader community. It is a perspective that can be applied to individuals and institutions. And let me tell you a little bit more about intersectionality. This is a concept that was created and brought up by Kimberly Crenshaw because she was thinking of the feminist movement. And she said, all I hear from the feminist movement, or I can't really relate to it because I feel they're talking about a middle-aged white woman with a certain economic and educational status. But I'm from the Afro-American female movement and I don't feel recognized. So she started thinking, like, when we talk about Maria, when we talk about Claudia, when we talk about Alina, we need to acknowledge all the social identities that come together in one individual. So Maria, I'm a South American woman living in Buenos Aires. I'm 31 years old and I have a lot of these characteristics, a lot of these social identities that make my create opportunities or create disadvantages. So what Kimberly Crenshaw was proposing is, if we try to solve inequalities and if we really want to make advocacy for equity, we need to understand all those social identities. If we're only trying to create policies for women, that's okay, but we should start thinking that we need policies for women that are white, women that are Black, women that are disabled, women that are old, young women, girls. So we need to start thinking and integrating all those social identities, that each of them create advantages or creates oppression. And to better introduce the concept, I'd like to show you a little video. It was created by a scholar, and I think it really helps us understand intersectionality. Please let me know if you can listen.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance, sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, Black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect Black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect Black women. Intersectional theory is now applied across a range of social divisions and also to understandings of domination, such as those associated with whiteness, masculinity, and heterosexuality. Intersectionality is not only about multiple identities, and it's not a simple answer to solving problems around equality and diversity. It is, however, an essential framework as we truly engage with issues around privilege and power and work to bring them into the open. Intersectionality means listening to others, examining our own privileges, and asking questions about who may be excluded or adversely affected by our work. As importantly, it means taking measurable action to invite, include, and centre the voices and work of marginalised individuals.
All right. So what did you think about the video? Does anyone want to share in the chat if you, I don't know, if you found anything interesting, if there was anything that you didn't know? Let's see. Okay, I'm going to share my points of view. So what I thought the first time I got across this concept, I thought, wow, this is so enlightening, because sometimes we tend to represent ourselves or to identify ourselves with one characteristic, you know, like we present ourselves, and if we're presenting ourselves in the workspace, we tend to highlight some of those characteristics or social identities. If we are with our friends, we try to highlight some others, but in reality, it's a true self-knowledge path that allows us to think about as a whole person, a whole individual with different characteristics. And this also creates a pathway to understand others. When I'm trying to understand Claudia and really create empathy and really connect to what she's living and going on, I can't just reduce herself to what she's telling me. I have to make an extra effort of acknowledging all those different social identities that have to do with religion, that have to do with age, that have to do with ableism, and a lot of things. It sounds quite complex, but it's really about making an effort and connecting with each other. It's trying to see what it's not visible instantaneously, and trying to acknowledge all those different things and making an effort of not thinking about just one of the characteristics, but as a whole. So I think this brings a good space for us to try to think, okay, if we're trying to solve one problem we're seeing, what are the factors we need to consider? And it's the same with the SDGs. If we're working on one SDG, we cannot only focus on SDG number 4. We need to see how this interconnects with all the other SDGs. Because when we advance on one, we're creating favorable efforts for the others to advance as well. And this is the same. And now I'd like to share the screen again and invite you to create and think about and reflect about your own intersectional map. What does this mean? It's a recognition of our own intersectionality, and we think it's critical for the construction of a future with equality. A true leader works on his or her self-knowledge, recognizing the dimensions, characteristics, and attributes, and valuing his or her own authenticity. So we'd like you to take 5 minutes to reflect on your own intersectional map, identify your coexisting social identities, and if they represent advantages or disadvantages in your life. You can bring that to the present moment, you can think about your background, or even in your future projections. And why do we think this is interesting for the US chapter? Because we know that within the US chapter, we have a lot of individualities, that we have a lot of authentic people. And we will try to acknowledge all those different characteristics within the US chapter. So we brought today, this is an intersectional map. So I want you to take 5 minutes to start thinking, okay, where am I located? Am I located in the US? Does this mean an advantage on my life? And we know that for many people, being eradicated in the US already brings us more opportunities than, for example, being in another country. What's my socioeconomic status? What are my religious beliefs? My nationality? Was I born and raised in the US? I was born in another country and now currently living in the US. What's my civil status? If I'm single, does this mean that when I go to a job interview, when I present myself for a scholarship, does it bring advantages or disadvantages? So please take 5 minutes and also reflect on what Claudia is bringing to the chat. Do you agree the US chapter should have a role in pointing out directions and bringing the DEI theme to the whole catalyst?
Hey, you call me all friendly, telling me how much you miss me. That's funny, I guess you've heard my songs. Well, I'm too busy for your business. Go find a girl who wants to listen. If you think I was born yesterday, you have got me wrong. So I cut you off, I don't need your love, 'cause I already cried enough, I've been done, I've been moving on since we said goodbye. I cut you off, I don't need your love, so you can try all you want. Your time is up, I'll tell you why. You say you're sorry, but it's too late now. So save it, get gone, shut up. 'Cause if you think I care about you now, well boy, I don't give a fuck. I remember that weekend when my best friend caught you creeping. You blamed it all on the alcohol. So I made my decision, 'cause you made your bed, sleep in it. Play the victim and switch your position. I'm through, I'm done. So I cut you off, I don't need you.
All right. So does anyone want to share your thoughts if you found anything interesting about yourself, or maybe one aspect you hadn't considered yet and now you realize it has brought advantages or even disadvantages into your experience? Maybe Claudia or Alina?
Yes, I would like to share. Thank you for putting, I mean, the song was perfect. I was reflecting on the slide that you shared with us. First time that I realized the advantages that one can, or disadvantages that one can experience throughout the life was when I arrived to the United States about 10 years ago. So about 8 to 7 years ago, I was doing a master's, and we were studying this aspect, and the teacher shared with us some content. And for the very first time, I got to think of the simple fact that I can enter on an elevator and not being discriminated, just simple as that. I never considered that just this little thing of, a step into elevator could be threatening for some people. And then when you think about the other areas that you just mentioned, the intersectionality, when you realize your background, where you study or you study or not, what family you came from, and what upbringing or what culture do you bring with your values, all of this together really form our personalities. And we cannot never say that I will be blank of all this stuff, because this is part of our personality formation. So what I understand, what we can do in an exercising of humanizing the DEI is become mindful that the differences exist and try to see beyond the first layer. The first layer should be just, sex, religion, sex orientation, age. Go beyond that and try to understand a little bit of the feeling of the person who may be experiencing a combination of those, and how can you be somebody that the person who might be feeling that in that moment would recognize as a peer. I mean, not as somebody would, oh, I'm so pitiful for you or something like, no, as a human being with rights, but with differences as well. So to me, I learned a lot, and your slide was really a recall for me on that. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Claudia. What about you, Alina? Would you like to share any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Claudia, I agree. It was such a eye-opening chart. And I wanted to tell a story about how when I first, like Claudia, when I first came to the US, well, actually when I first started teaching, when I first came to the US, I didn't, maybe because I was in California where, you know, if you're Asian, you're not a minority. But when I first started teaching, I first started teaching in a law school when I was 33. And I'm actually quite short. I'm not very tall. And I first started teaching in Mississippi, which is regional in the US, and which is very white. It's very white. There's not much diversity. And the people that were attending law schools were primarily from the region. And because I was white, I had a different accent. Sorry, because I was not white and I had a different accent, and I was female and small. And teaching a class of, like, at that time, it was like 100 students, like first year students. I see how intersectionality works, because there are so many different points of discrimination for me. You know what I mean? And it reached a point where the students, you know, the way law students were, they're fighting crowd. But if one or two students decide to pick on you, then the whole class kind of gets together. And when I first started teaching, there were kids in my class who might have been around my age, but they were whistling at me, you know, because I'm Asian, small, and all that. And I'll talk a little bit about this later on when we talk about implicit bias. The people respect you when you project that air of confidence, whether you know a lot or not. And that's one of the implicit bias. But the people who are trained, you know, in like to with a lot of information, they tend to come across and say, oh, I don't know that, you know. And when you say I don't know that, that's a way for everyone to jump in because of that implicit bias, you know, the if this person comes across as unsure, even though their uncertainty is grounded on the fact of what they do know, that's a room to discriminate, right? So I thought it was great because that little chart that you had showed you the different points in which you can discriminate. And I just want to make one last point that I think is really good to the discussion, is that we talk about discrimination, and Claudia talked a little bit about, you know, moving on and knowing more the different points in which you can discriminate. I want to recommend, and some of you may know this, but there's a theory by John Rawls in the Theory of Justice, where he actually talks about, if you're a policy maker and you want to make decisions, you have to make it behind this veil of ignorance. You have to strip yourself of all these identities, not knowing where you will end up in society, so that you can make the best policy, you know, that's not going to discriminate. And I think that's a good way to think about intersectionality, because we have so many different points in which we discriminate. So thank you, Maria. That was great. Thank you.
No, definitely. I don't know if maybe anyone else would like to share. Marinel, Som, Reshima, Wendy. Okay, thank you, Aisha, for being here. So thank you, Alina, and thank you, Claudia, for sharing those experiences. And I always love this exercise because when we start thinking about our own experience, we realize we definitely have a lot of points of discrimination, as Alina was saying, but it also brings us an opportunity of saying, how many times did I act in a way that I wasn't recognizing or truly appreciating all the characteristics or social identities of others? And I really love this because it brings us to reflect and see, okay, how can I start becoming more aware of it for myself and with myself, because it's important that we do recognize and self-acknowledge all these social identities for ourselves, but also for others. And that is the true starting point of DEI, because it brings empathy. And empathy lies on the ground, and it creates a common ground and a common level for us to start relating to each other in a way that people feel confident, feel appreciated, and can show all their true identities, no matter in what context they are. So what happens in reality is, like, when you go to work, you highlight some of those social identities and you don't highlight others if you can hide them, because you don't feel like they will be appreciated. Like, one girl was telling me the other day, like, I'm usually a funny girl, but I don't bring myself as a funny girl into work because I think it won't be appreciated. And I think it will actually bring me a step backwards in the career plan that I have for myself. And we were thinking, hey, that's really bad. And we should be able to show ourselves as funny people, no matter where we are. And the same with all the other social identities. Sometimes we don't bring up our own religious beliefs because we know that creates a lot of tension, or our politics, our ideology beliefs. And we should start making that effort. Because when we complement each other and when we truly connect with each other and we bring empathy as a common ground level, there are no tensions. There's only an opportunity to learn about each other. And that's what DEI means, at least for me, and I think for Claudia and Alina, that we've been talking a lot about this lately. So now, Alina said something that has to do with bias, and that's something that lies also at the core of DEI, because bias, beautiful sharing, Maria. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. And I'd like Alina to tell us a little more about bias. I know it's something that maybe we've been hearing for the past, I think, 2 years, that we had like the unconscious bias boom. But once again, I'd like to do this recognition of what does it mean for us. I'd like Alina to share, and then ask each of you in the session to think, okay, am I reflected in what Alina is telling me? Like, do I need to gain more consciousness on these points? So I'm going to share again the screen. Just a sec. Sorry.
All right, thanks, Maria. So I just saw this note in the chat from Rishima, and she says that internal understanding is very important and allows you to have more empathy and recognize that everyone is human. Thanks for sharing your stories. But I want to use that to jumpstart the thinking about unconscious bias, because having an internal understanding of what we think about or not think about, right? So I'm sure everyone has seen that iceberg where there's 90% on top and then 90%, there's 10% on top and then 90% under the water that's not known or seen. Having that kind of internal understanding of the 90%, I think is really important, right? When we think about DEI. And so when we talk about unconscious bias, or in sometimes we call it implicit bias, it's really an association or attitude about a person or social group. While not plainly expressed, it operates beyond our control and awareness, informs our perceptions, and can influence our decision-making and behavior. It exists in each person's worldview and affects our actions from the classroom to the workplace. And again, sometimes we may be aware of that 10%, like we may say, okay, I'm not going to, I'm not going to say something that is going to come across as sexist, right? I'm not going to say something or do something that's going to come across as racist. But what we don't realize is that underneath that ocean, right, our personality and the way we see the world, our perception, there's that 90% of unconscious biases or implicit biases that exist in everyone, right? So I'm sure all of us, we've experienced discrimination, but we've also discriminated on some level, right? Whether it's little or but we've been on both sides of the coin. And so being aware of the implicit bias is and knowing what to do is very important. So the book that there are a lot of people from social psychologists to neurologists to cognitive scientists that have actually studied unconscious bias. And as most of us here would know, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, they actually won a Nobel Prize in 1970, I think, for their work on implicit biases, right? So they were saying that the human mind is predictably unpredictable, right? Because there's so many errors in the way we think, and we're not even aware of those errors, right? And then other people that have done work in this field are like in law, you have Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler. You have Dan Ariely. So there are a lot of work that has been done in this area. But the book that I think a lot of people have read and know about is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And he's the one who won the Nobel Prize with Amos Tversky. But it's a really good book to show you that the 10% in which we are conscious about what we do and what we think, and also the 90% that we are unconscious about, the implicit and the not only is it's implicit, but there are also a lot of errors in that in those thinking, because we haven't brought it up to the level where we are conscious about those biases. So there are a couple of quotes that I pulled out from the book that I think will be helpful here. Right. So sometimes he said we are blind to the obvious, but we are also blind to our blindness. Like we don't see, what we don't see what we don't know. Right. A reliable way of making people believe in falsehood is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from truth. Right. So like things like social media, and the frequency of information or misinformation that's put out there. Can actually perpetuate falsehood about other people, about other groups, about other communities, right? And sometimes they're not even true. But because of the frequency, we tend to accept that things like that is true, right? A reliable way to make people believe in falsehood is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from the truth. Right, in authoritarian institutions, and marketers have always known this fact, right? People who are good with who are really good advertisers, right, or really good politicians. If you keep saying it over and over and over and over again, people tend to believe it, right? And so we need to be aware of the way the human mind works, right? And this is a huge field. Like, I mean, people have proven that part of it is biological, part of it is psychological, right? So the biases exist. And the question for us, for our purposes, is, well, how do we address those biases? Or how do we become aware and address those biases? So Daniel Kahneman in this book, I think, it's an awesome book, because he talks about the system 1 of thinking and the system two of thinking, right? The system 1 is that 10% that you're aware of in the system. It's the other way. The system 1 is the 90% that you're not aware of, and the system 2 is the 10% that you're aware of, right? And he said that the way to actually become more aware of our biases is to actually slow the way we think. That's why he says that, thinking fast and slow is to if we think about things slowly, then we become more aware of our biases, right? Whereas if we are emotional, reacting, having quick thoughts, then the biases, the way we look at other people, we're not able to address it. So I wanted to just make one recommendation that's actually from this book, right? He said, Kahneman said that if we're trying to slow down the way we think, let's just say we are in a meeting, right? Like we like to ask people, well, what do people think, right? And we just go around the room and people would talk. But that way, that actually perpetuates a lot of emotional responses, or off the cuff comments, which can lead to biases or discrimination that we may not be aware of, right? So to think about it more slowly, right? One way to do that, he recommends, is to give a sheet of paper to everyone in the room and get everyone to write down their thoughts right before you actually broach the issue and everyone starts talking, right? So once you're made to write down your thoughts, given some time, your thinking then slows down, right? Like what Maria did with the intersectionality, right? She gave us some time to think about it so that when we actually get the opportunity to share what we think with the group, it's a little bit more reasoned and a little bit more, we've gone through a thought process, right? And so that's one way he suggests. Yeah, so that's unconscious bias. And I think Maria has a slide that she was going to share after this, which talks about the biases in the workplace. So Maria, did you have a slide that you wanted to share after this? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so thank you, Alina. And I completely agree with everything that you were saying. So one might think, okay, I want to become a DEI champion. And what does that mean? It means acknowledging all the different social identities of the people that are within our communities, in our family, in our group of friends, in our workspace. It means bringing empathy to the question. It brings truly making an effort of thinking if we are being truly inclusive, if there are some things we're not taking into account, or what's happening. And you might say, okay, I want to do that, but if I have an unconscious bias that's behind, and it's something that has to do with my brain, what can I do about it? So here are some actions you can take to combat unconscious bias. First of all, is question your assumptions. Where does this thinking come from? Where do these thoughts come from? Are they related to my own experience? Is it that I don't like traveling because I only had one bad travel experience? So start to ask yourself, why am I thinking this way? Second, analyze. Ask yourself if the forms of biases and covering you are experiencing or enacting are consistent with your personal and organizational values. If they are not, identify the opportunities to change. Then take a risk. I love this point. Take a risk. Put yourself outside your comfort zone. Find people such as, maybe if we're talking about the workspace, a manager, a mentor, a sponsor that will help you go through those risks and make them worthwhile. Then disrupt the default. So challenge elements of the status quo that may perpetuate bias, and hold yourself and others accountable. It's the same with the SDGs. We're always saying we need to measure impact. We need to make ourselves accountable. So the same happens with DEI. When you start recognizing all those injustices, inequalities, don't stay shut up. Bring up opportunities of talking about this, debating about this. If you find or spot something that's not quite right, make the point. And people maybe at first will have a little tension, but you see, if you make it a constant in your life, then you will create so many good opportunities for understanding that it will be amazing and completely worthwhile. So this brings us to the end. And I'd like to thank you, and going back to the beginning. So why did we choose this session to be called Humanizing DEI? Because we do believe that DEI has to do with ourselves being human, with connecting with ourselves and being able to connect with others, and recognizing and truly valuing our own authenticity and the authenticity of others. And when we talk about DEI, sometimes we think about maternity leave, we think about hiring people without looking at the curricula, we think about a lot of things, and sometimes they, I don't know, at least for me, they seem so unrealistic for me, and they seem like something that I won't be able to achieve because I don't work in the HR department of a huge company. So what can I do as an individual today? It's start my own self-recognition, start bringing consciousness into all those social identities I have within myself, and that make Maria what Maria is, and really start making that empathy and identity knowledge with the rest, and making an effort to do so. So in reality, when we talk about DEI, we're talking about making a true sense of community where everybody feels valued. So that's what we want to bring into the US chapter. That's the challenge we wanted to propose today for our chapter. And it's something that we want to spread around Catalyst. So we hope to continue working with all of you. We hope to continue debating and talking about this, because we still have a long way to go. And I don't know, Alina, if you have like a message to give to the audience before we leave.
I know that the US chapter is focused on DEI. I think we would want to invite, I'm not sure what the next step is with Catalyst, but I'm sure we would want to invite people to join in the discussion and the conversation, right? So I think Catalyst would invite us to the next step, right? So yeah, so we hope that you guys will come and participate and help us, shape the conversation.
Yeah, I love to point this comment on how teens so often say, treat me as a really human. It's so true. And what Raisime is saying, that we see a lot of emotional responses and not enough reflection before speaking. And this happens for Raisime, especially in social media, but it happens every single time we meet with one another. So I really hope you get to join us in the next US chapter meeting, that you want to join this task force, and that we can co-create together and say, okay, where do we want to go and how do we want to do it? Because all voices are important for us, and we really need to work and collaborate together. So we'll keep on working on the SDG number 5, and also because we know that it repercutes in so many others. For example, we can talk about quality education if we don't talk about gender equality. So we believe this is an important issue to address, and we hope you're here for the journey with us. So thank you, Alina, once again. Thank you, Claudia, and thanks all of you who joined and were so responsive, and we'd really like to connect.
Thanks for coming. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.